The smell found you before you reached the porch. Neck bones had been going since morning, low and slow, and that kitchen was thick with smoke and pepper and pork. Nobody called it a recipe. You put the bones in the water, seasoned it, and waited. What came out fed a family for 2 days on a cut that cost next to nothing. Black families across the South built weeks of dinners around those bones. Wait until you hear what number 17 did with day-old cornbread. Number 8 fed a full table on what most butchers threw out. And number 3 is a plate that vanished so quietly, most people under 50 have never heard of it. Hit subscribe because these meals deserve to be remembered. Here are 25 forgotten neck bone dinners poor black families made stretch for days. Number 25, neck bones and okra. Okra grew wild in southern gardens every summer, shooting up so fast that a missed day of picking meant woody, tough pods. But young okra, sliced thin and dropped into a pot of neck bones that had been going since morning, did something no other vegetable could. It thickened the broth on its own. The natural mucilage turned the potlikker heavy and silky without a pinch of flour. Families across Alabama and the Mississippi Delta cooked this from June straight through September, when okra came in faster than anyone could use it fresh. The bones gave the pot its depth. The okra gave it body. Some threw in a handful of garden tomatoes to cut the thickness. Others left it alone, ladled over rice in a wide bowl. It was not gumbo. It was older than gumbo, and it asked for less. Number 24, smothered neck bones with onion gravy. The bones were browned first in a cast iron skillet, then buried under sliced yellow onions that cooked down until they turned soft and sweet. A little flour went into the pan drippings to thicken it. The gravy built itself around the bones, dark and rich and heavy enough to stand a spoon in. This was not a light meal. This was a plate you set down in front of someone who had been working outside since dawn. The onion gravy went over white bread or biscuits, whatever was in the house, and it stretched that meal another day. In parts of Georgia and the Carolinas, smothered neck bones showed up on Sundays when the family could not afford a proper roast. Number 23, neck bones and mustard greens. Mustard greens had a bite that no other green in the garden could match. Raw, they burned the back of the tongue, cooked low in a pot of neck bones for 2 hours. That burn softened into a peppery warmth that cut clean through the richness of the pork. Families in Alabama and Mississippi planted mustard greens alongside collards, but the mustard came up faster and tolerated poorer soil. The leaves were thinner, more ragged, and they shrank down to almost nothing in the pot, which meant you needed a bigger armload to fill a bowl. The potlikker ran pale green with a sharp edge that some people preferred over the heavier, darker liquor from collards. Children who turned their noses up at the greens still sopped the liquor with cornbread because that peppery broth tasted like the bones dressed up in something new. This was a weeknight pot that asked for nothing but time, a handful of greens, and whatever neck bones the butcher had left. Number 22, neck bones and green beans. Fresh green beans snapped between the fingers came out of the garden all summer long, and when there were too many to eat raw or fry up quick, they went into the neck bone pot. The beans cooked until they lost every trace of crunch and turned soft and gray-green, saturated with pork fat. Nobody in those kitchens wanted a crisp green bean. Crisp meant undercooked. Done meant the bean had given up its resistance and taken on the flavor of everything around it. A plate of neck bones and green beans with a cold glass of buttermilk beside it was a July supper that did not try to impress anyone. It just filled the house with the smell of slow pork and kept the family quiet until the sun went down. In parts of rural Arkansas and East Texas, families strung green beans on thread and hung them to dry for winter, then rehydrated them in a neckbone pot months later. Those dried beans, called leather britches, came back tougher and chewier with a concentrated flavor the fresh ones never had. Number 21, neckbone and potato stew. Potatoes were the great stretcher. When the neckbones alone were not enough to fill the table, you cut up 4 or 5 russet potatoes and dropped them into the pot. They soaked up the broth and broke down at the edges, thickening everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. Families who had moved north to Chicago and Detroit during the Great Migration kept this meal alive in cramped apartment kitchens. The pot was smaller, but the method was the same. You browned the bones, covered them with water, seasoned them, and waited. The potatoes went in during the last hour. When they were soft enough to mash against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon, dinner was ready. Number 20, neckbones and cabbage. A whole head of cabbage cost almost nothing, and when you cut it into wedges and dropped it into a pot of neckbones that had been simmering all day, it turned into something entirely different from raw cabbage. The leaves went soft and silky and took on all that pork and pepper flavor. The cabbage wedges held their shape just enough to lift them out with a slotted spoon and set them on the plate next to the bones. This was a common Monday dinner across the South, the start of a new week on a tight budget. 1 head of cabbage, 1 pack of neckbones, and the whole family ate. The potlikker from this one was especially good, almost sweet from the cabbage. Here's something worth understanding about neckbones. For most of the 20th century, they were treated as waste. Butchers trimmed them off the larger cuts and sold them for almost nothing, or simply handed them over to whoever asked. In many grocery stores across the South, the neck bones and pig feet and hog maws sat in a separate case, sometimes near the back. The customers who bought them were almost always black. This was not an accident. Generations of black families had learned to build entire meals from the parts of the animal that plantation kitchens discarded. What started as forced scarcity became culinary knowledge that passed from mother to daughter across 2 centuries. The butcher thought he was selling scraps. The woman buying them knew she was carrying home 3 dinners. That knowledge, the understanding of what heat and time and seasoning could pull from a bone, was worth more than anything printed in a cookbook. Number 19, neck bones and rice. If there was one meal on this list that showed up more often than any other, it was neck bones over rice. Rice stretched everything. A single pound of neck bones that would barely feed 2 people on its own could feed a table of 6 when it sat on top of a mound of white rice. The rice soaked up the broth, the rendered fat, the salt, the smoke, all of it. Every grain carried flavor by the time a fork reached it. Families bought rice in large bags because it was the cheapest starch in the store, cheaper than flour, cheaper than potatoes, and it kept in the pantry for months without going stale. The cooking was simple. The neck bones went into the pot first, simmered until the meat was tender and the broth had gone dark and concentrated. Then the rice was cooked separately because nobody wanted it mushy from sitting in the pot too long. The bones and broth went over the rice at the table, and everyone spooned it out of the same serving bowl. In households across Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas, this was the meal that appeared when there was nothing else to plan. No recipe, no discussion, just rice and bones. Some families added a splash of hot sauce. Others stirred in a spoonful of butter. Most ate it plain because the broth was already doing all the work. The pot could sit on the back burner for hours, and the longer it sat, the better the broth got. Children came home from school, lifted the lid, and knew exactly what dinner was without asking. The smell told the whole story. This was not a meal anyone chose from a list of options. It was the meal that chose itself when the pantry was almost bare and payday had not come yet. Number 18, neck bones and pinto beans. Pinto beans were the workhorses of the dried bean shelf. They cost almost nothing, stored for years, and doubled in size overnight in a bowl of water. Soaked and simmered with neck bones, they turned creamy on the inside while holding their shape just enough to give the pot some texture. The broth went thick and brown, somewhere between a soup and a stew, heavy enough to coat the back of a spoon. Families in Texas and Oklahoma kept a bag of pintos in the pantry the way other households kept bread. When the pintos went into the neckbone pot, the meal stretched far enough to feed whoever showed up unannounced, because someone always did. A bowl of pinto beans and neck bones over cornbread with a raw onion sliced on the side was a supper that cost pennies and held you through a full day of work. Number 17, neck bones and egg noodles. Egg noodles were not something every family kept, but the ones who did swore by them. The noodles were wider and denser than spaghetti, and they held up better in a heavy pork broth without turning to mush. Families dropped them into the pot after the neck bones had simmered for 2 hours, and in 15 minutes, the noodles went soft and slippery, coated in rendered fat. The broth thickened from the starch and turned silky in a way that plain water and bones alone never could. In parts of Tennessee and Virginia, this was a cold weather meal that came out when the temperature dropped below freezing and the kitchen windows fogged up from the steam. Children ate the noodles first and went back for the bones, sucking the marrow out and stacking the clean bones on the edge of the plate like a small monument to what had been supper. Number 16, neck bones and black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas carry more superstition than any other bean in the southern pantry. Eating them on New Year's Day was supposed to bring luck for the rest of the year, and most families took that seriously enough to make sure the pot was full by noon on January 1st. But black-eyed peas with neck bones was not a once-a-year occasion. It showed up whenever the dried peas were on hand and the budget was thin, which was most weeks. The peas cooked faster than pintos or limas, breaking down in about an hour into a thick, starchy pot that clung to the rice underneath. The neck bones gave them a depth that salt alone could never reach. Families in Georgia and the Carolinas grew black-eyed peas in the garden between the corn rows because the plants fixed nitrogen in the soil and helped the corn grow taller. The food fed the family and the garden fed itself. That was the kind of efficiency that did not come from a textbook. It came from people who had been watching dirt and weather for generations. Number 15, neck bones and field peas. Field peas are smaller and earthier than black-eyed peas, with a mineral taste that comes from the iron in the soil where they grew. They were a garden staple across the rural South, and when the fresh pods came in during summer, families shelled them on the porch in the evening and cooked them the next morning with whatever bones were in the house. Neck bones and field peas made a pot that could be served 3 ways across a week. The first night, straight from the pot with cornbread. The second night, over rice with hot sauce. The third night, mashed up and reheated in a skillet with a little bacon grease until the edges got crispy. That third version, the fried down leftovers, was sometimes the best one. Nothing in the pot changed, only the method changed and the meal felt new each time. Number 14, neck bones and corn. There were 2 versions of this dinner, and which one showed up depended on the calendar. In the summer, when fresh corn came off the stalk in the early morning before the sugar turned to starch, whole ears went straight into the pot alongside neck bones that had been building flavor since noon. The cobs released a natural sweetness into the broth that balanced the salt and smoke of the pork. You ate the corn off the cob with your hands, then drank the broth from the bowl. In the winter, families reached for dried corn that had been shelled and stored in cloth sacks, or canned corn from the pantry shelf. Dried corn needed an overnight soak before it was any use in a pot, and it never matched the sweetness of fresh, but it gave the broth a starchy weight that fresh corn could not. The winter version came out thicker, heavier, closer to a stew. The summer version ran lighter, almost celebratory, the kind of meal families looked forward to when the first ears appeared. What set this dinner apart was not the cooking, it was geography. Corn grew in almost every county in the South, good soil or poor, flat ground or hilly. You did not need a productive garden to grow corn. You needed a patch of dirt and enough rain. That meant every family, regardless of how little land they had access to, could put corn and neckbones on the table at least part of the year. It was the most widely available meal in the rural southern kitchen, and it carried the taste of summer even when it came from a jar in the middle of January. The families who grew their own corn picked it at dawn before the heat changed the flavor and cooked it the same day. That freshness was the line between a decent pot and one people remembered 30 years later. Here is the part that nobody in the food industry talks about. The cuts that poor black families survived on for generations. The neck bones and oxtails and pig feet are now expensive. What used to be the cheapest thing in the meat case, the parts nobody else wanted, started showing up on restaurant menus with new names and high prices. Chefs in Brooklyn and Austin and Portland discovered what grandmothers in Mississippi had known since the 1800s, that low and slow turns a cheap bone into something extraordinary. The prices followed. Today, neck bones can cost several dollars a pound in many grocery stores. Oxtails, which used to be given away, now sit among the most expensive cuts in the case. The families who built their survival around these cuts are being priced out of their own food tradition. That is not nostalgia, that is economics, and it explains why so many of these dinners are disappearing from the tables where they were invented. Number 13, neck bone and sweet potato pot. Sweet potatoes grow easily in southern soil, and many families kept a patch of them in the yard well into the 1970s. Cut into thick rounds and added to a pot of simmering neck bones, they softened and absorbed the savory broth while holding on to their own sweetness. The combination sounds strange if you have not tasted it, but the salt and smoke from the bones against the sweetness of the potato created something the tongue recognized as complete. You did not need dessert after this meal. The sweetness was already there, built into the dinner itself. Families served this in deep bowls in the fall and winter, when the sweet potatoes came out of the ground and the cold made the body ask for something heavy. A single pot produced enough for 2 suppers, and the sweet potatoes held up better as leftovers than rice or bread did. Number 12, neck bone and rutabaga stew. Rutabagas are ugly. They look like oversized turnips with waxy purple skin, and most people walking through a grocery store today would not know what to do with one. But Depression-era black families knew. You peeled them, cubed them, and put them in the pot with neck bones. They cooked down slower than potatoes, held their shape longer, and had a slightly bitter, earthy flavor that stood up to the richness of the pork. Rutabaga stew was a cold weather meal in the rural South, especially in the hill country of northern Alabama and North Mississippi, where rutabagas grew well in rocky soil. This is one of the meals on this list that genuinely faded. Younger generations did not learn to cook with rutabagas because they did not grow up seeing them in the kitchen. Number 11, neckbone and parsnip stew. Parsnips look like pale carrots, and they taste sweeter than most root vegetables, especially after the first frost hits the ground. Black families in the Upper South and in Great Migration cities, where parsnips were common at the market, peeled them and cut them into thick coins before adding them to the neckbone pot. They held their shape longer than potatoes and turned creamy at the edges without dissolving into the broth. The sweetness of the parsnip against the salty pork made a stew that did not need sugar or anything else to round it out. This was a cold weather dinner, heavy and warming, the kind of meal you ate standing at the stove because you could not wait for it to reach the table. Number 10, neck bones and yellow squash. Yellow squash came in fast during the summer months, faster than most families could eat it. The vines produced so heavily that neighbors left grocery bags of squash on each other's porches without asking permission, sliced into thick rounds and dropped into a pot of simmering neck bones. The squash went translucent and silky within 20 minutes. It soaked up pork broth and turned into something richer than squash had any right to be on its own. This was a July and August meal across the deep South, when the garden was given more than the kitchen could handle, and the heat outside made standing over the stove feel like a sentence. One pot, low flame, everything in together. The squash dissolved into the broth and thickened it from the inside, and the bones gave the whole pot a savory anchor that plain squash could never carry alone. Number 9, neckbone and macaroni. Not baked macaroni and cheese. This was simpler. Elbow macaroni boiled until it was just past tender, then stirred directly into the pot with the neck bones and broth. The noodles swelled up and absorbed the liquid the same way rice did, but the texture was different, chewier, and more substantial. Some families added a handful of whatever cheese was in the refrigerator, but plenty made it without. The broth itself gave the noodles enough flavor. This was a meal that appeared in households where there were many mouths to feed, because a box of macaroni cost very little and turned one pot of neck bones into enough food for 8 or 9 people. You could not do that with rice alone. The noodles stretched the math in a way that no other ingredient could match at that price. Number 8, neck bone soup. This was the thinnest version of a neck bone dinner, and in some homes, it was the most common. When the bones were all you had, you made soup. The bones simmered in a large pot of water until every trace of flavor had left them. You added whatever was available, an onion, a few carrots if you had them, a diced potato, salt and pepper. The soup was mostly broth, and the broth was the whole point. It was golden and fatty and tasted like something that should have cost more than it did. A single pot fed a full table because the liquid did the work. Everyone got a bowl, everyone got bread to soak in it, and the bones were passed around so the children could pull off the small pieces of meat that clung to the joints. A meal that cost almost nothing, fed 7, and left enough to warm up the next morning. Number 7, neckbone and crowder pea dinner. Crowder peas get their name from the way they crowd together inside the pod, packed tight against each other until they develop flat sides. They taste nuttier and richer than black-eyed peas, and they hold their shape better after long cooking. In the rural South, crowder peas were a field crop that families grew between the rows of cotton or corn, a practice that stretched back to the years before emancipation. The peas fixed nitrogen in the soil, which helped the cash crop, and they fed the family, which helped everything else. Cooked with neck bones, crowder peas produced a thick, dark broth that tasted like the earth they grew in. The peas came from the same land the family worked. The bones came from the animal that was slaughtered in the fall. The meal connected the field to the kitchen to the table in a line that had no interruption. Families who grew Crowder peas dried them for winter the same way they dried butter beans and field peas. A mason jar of dried Crowder peas on the pantry shelf meant that dinner was always possible, even when the money was gone. You soaked them overnight, put them in a pot with neck bones and water, and let the stove do the rest. By evening, the house smelled like something important was happening. In many homes, this was the dinner that visitors remembered, not because it was complicated, but because the flavor was deeper and more serious than what they expected from a pot of peas and bones. Crowder peas have mostly vanished from grocery shelves today. You can still find them at farmers markets in parts of the South, but the generation that grew them in the yard is getting older, and the knowledge of when to pick them and how to dry them is leaving with them. Here is what disappears when a cook dies. Not the recipe. Recipes can be written down, and some of them were. What disappears is the timing, the feel of the dough, the way she knew the pot was ready without lifting the lid, the understanding that this particular bone needs 4 hours and that one needs 3. None of that was ever recorded. It lived in the hands and the instincts of women who cooked every day of their lives for 40, 50, 60 years. When a grandmother who made neckbone dinners passed away, the family did not just lose a person. They lost a library of knowledge that had never been cataloged. The next generation could follow a recipe if there was one, but they could not replicate the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly when to lower the heat and exactly how much salt to throw in without ever reaching for a measuring spoon. Number 6, neck bones and carrots. Carrots were not the first vegetable most people associate with soul food, but they showed up in neck bone pots more often than anyone wrote down. They were cheap, they lasted for weeks in a cool place, and they added a sweetness to the broth that balanced the heaviness of the pork. Families cut them into thick rounds so they would not dissolve during the long simmer. By the time the pot was done, the carrots had turned soft and golden, almost caramelized from the heat and the fat. Children who claimed they did not like carrots ate them out of the neck bone pot without complaint because they did not taste like carrots anymore. They tasted like whatever the pot tasted like. In the winter months, when the garden was bare and canned goods were running low, a bag of carrots from the store and a package of neck bones made a dinner that got a family through the night. Number 5, neck bone and navy bean pot. Navy beans are small and white and cook faster than most dried beans. In a pot with neck bones, they broke down quickly and turned the broth thick and cloudy. The result was closer to a porridge than a soup, dense enough that a spoon could stand in the bowl. This was a fill-you-up meal, not a delicate one. Families made it when the weather was cold and the work was hard and the body needed fuel that would last until morning. Navy beans were available at every general store and grocery across the South, and they stored indefinitely in a dry pantry. A 1-pound bag of beans and a couple pounds of neck bones made a pot large enough for 2 dinners and a lunch. The simplicity was the point. You did not need technique, you needed patience and a stove. Number 4, neck bone and hominy. Hominy is dried corn that has been treated with lye to remove the hull, and it has a chewy, almost bouncy texture unlike any other grain. Stirred into a pot of neck bones, the hominy swelled up and absorbed the broth while keeping that distinctive bite. This was more common in the westward black communities through Oklahoma, East Texas, and parts of Arkansas, where corn-based cooking had deep roots. Hominy came canned and cost very little, making it an easy addition to the neck bone pot. The dinner was starchy and filling and had a corn sweetness that balanced the salt of the pork. Families who grew up eating this remember the texture more than the taste. That chew was something no other ingredient could reproduce. Number 3, neckbone and tomato gravy over rice. This was not a stew, and it was not a soup. It was a gravy, thick and red-brown, made by cooking neck bones low until the fat rendered out, then stirring in canned tomatoes and letting the whole pot reduce until it tightened up into something that clung to a spoon. The acid from the tomatoes pulled flavor out of the bones in a way that plain water took twice as long to accomplish. Some families added a pinch of sugar to soften the tang. Others left it sharp because that bite was the whole point. The gravy went over rice, always rice, and the plate looked simple enough that no one outside the family would have guessed how long it took to make. In kitchens across the Deep South, this was a Saturday afternoon meal. The pot started after breakfast and was ready by the time the sun moved to the other side of the house. The smell drifted out through the screen door and told the neighbors exactly what was happening inside without a word being spoken. Number 2, neckbone gravy over grits. The grits were cooked thick, spread across the plate like a bed, and then the neckbone gravy went on top. The gravy came from the pot, the drippings and the broth thickened with a spoonful of flour until it coated the back of a spoon. The pulled meat sat on top of the grits in a pile, and the whole plate was eaten with a fork. This was breakfast in some families and supper in others, depending on when the pot was ready. In the Low Country, where grits showed up at every meal, this was the version that used up the last of the neck bones when the pot had been going for 2 days. The grits soaked up the gravy the way cornbread soaked up potlikker, slow and steady until every bite carried the whole flavor of the pot. Number 1, the Sunday neck bone plate. This was not one recipe. This was the meal a grandmother built when the whole family was coming over and the budget said neck bones. She made the rice, she made the greens, she made the cornbread, and in the center of the table sat the pot, the bones piled high and falling apart, the broth ladled into a separate bowl for anyone who wanted it over their plate. The Sunday neck bone plate was the meal that proved a cook's worth. Every side dish on that table had been timed to finish together. The cornbread came out of the oven the moment the greens were done. The rice was ready when the bones were ready. None of it was written down. All of it was right. This meal was the thesis of the entire list, that a woman with a cheap cut of pork and a kitchen full of knowledge could set a table that made a family feel whole. Number 21, liver and onions. Organ meat was given away nearly free, and black cooks turned it into a supper rich enough to feed a working man. When hogs were butchered, the liver was among the parts handed off rather than kept, which made it one of the cheapest sources of protein in the store. Cooks dredged the slices in seasoned flour, then laid them in a hot skillet just long enough to brown, because liver turns tough the moment it overcooks. The real magic was the onions. A great pile of them went soft and sweet in the same pan, soaking up the drippings, then got spooned over the top with a thin gravy made from the browned bits. The sweetness of the onion balanced the deep iron flavor of the meat. Served over rice or with a slab of cornbread, it stretched a few pennies of organ meat into a hearty plate, cheap, nourishing, and gone too soon from most kitchens. Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash. Rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. Number 24, crackling bread. If your family rendered their own lard, you knew this bread. Cracklings were the crispy golden bits left behind after the fat cooked out of the pork. You folded them into cornbread batter and baked the whole thing in a cast iron skillet slicked with bacon drippings. Every bite had a tiny burst of salt and crunch buried in the corn. The standard weekly ration for an enslaved person included 3 to 4 pounds of pork and a peck of cornmeal. Crackling bread was the meal that stretched both to their absolute limit. It fed a whole family on what a wealthier table would have scraped into the trash. Abby Fisher, born enslaved in Alabama, included cornbread variations in her 1881 cookbook published in San Francisco. She could not read or write. Every recipe was dictated from memory to friends who transcribed them. After the Great Migration pulled black families into cities where nobody slaughtered their own hogs, the cracklings disappeared. And when the cracklings disappeared, so did the bread. It was poverty turned into genius, gone when the poverty left. Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. A pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour. She sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 15, ham hock and lima beans. A 2-pound bag of dried baby limas on the kitchen table in 1946 Mobile, soaked overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda. The cook drained them, rinsed them, dropped them into a Dutch oven with a smoked ham hock the butcher gave her free. She added a yellow onion stuck with 3 cloves, a bay leaf, enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot simmered 4 hours while she ironed shirts. The hock came out. She stripped the meat, stirred it back in, salt last so the beans stayed tender. She served it over white rice with a wedge of corn pone and a slice of raw onion. The dish fed 5 for 9 cents. That was the whole bill. It ran the family from Wednesday to Friday, and any week the paycheck came up short. Your grandmother kept the recipe in her head the way her ancestors had since the cotton fields. Number 22, deviled eggs with paprika. Every black woman at Easter had her deviled egg plate. Not just any plate, a special carrier with little indentations for each egg half. She carried it to church like a crown, because on Easter Sunday, your eggs were judged. The differences were subtle but deadly serious. Ratio of mustard to mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, or dill, how much paprika went on top. The first known deviled egg recipe appeared in 1877 in the Montgomery Advertiser in Alabama. By the mid-20th century, a dozen eggs cost about 60 cents. Those vintage egg plates from the 1950s and 1960s now sell for $25 to $75 on collector markets. The dish had a practical origin too. After weeks of Lent, your family had accumulated hard-boiled Easter eggs that needed eating. But the real reason deviled eggs mattered was simpler than that. They were one of the few pieces of fancy serving ware that working class Black women owned. Presentation was everything. Adrian Miller, the James Beard Award winning soul food historian, has called deviled eggs one of the clearest shared traditions across the Southern racial divide, a rare point of commonality. That small truth mattered. Number 22, smothered potatoes and onions. If there were potatoes in the bin and an onion on the counter, supper was already settled. Smothering was one of the great techniques of the Southern kitchen, a slow braise that turned the plain ingredients into something soft and savory. The cook sliced potatoes and onions thin, laid them in a heavy skillet with a spoon of bacon grease, and let them cook down low and slow with the lid on. The steam trapped under that lid did the work, melting the onions into the potatoes until the whole thing went tender and sweet. Toward the end, the lid came off so the bottom layer could brown and form that prized golden crust against the iron. A little salt, a little black pepper, and maybe a splash of water to keep it from sticking was all it took. Served with a piece of cornbread, it made a full plate without a scrap of meat. Pure comfort built from two of the cheapest things in the house. Number 23, chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for a nickel a pound, sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the Potlikker, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today. Number 21, pineapple upside down cake. The moment your grandmother flipped that cast iron skillet and the cake came out perfect, golden and glistening, the whole kitchen held its breath. Not a single pineapple ring out of place. That flip was the most dramatic moment of Easter dinner. Canned pineapple became widely available after the First World War when the Hawaiian Pineapple Company began marketing it aggressively. In 1925, they held a recipe contest that received 60,000 entries. 2,500 of them were for pineapple upside down cake. A can of pineapple rings cost about 25 cents in the 1940s. The cake required just one 10-inch cast iron skillet, which most Black households already owned. Betty Cook, food columnist for the Afro-American newspaper, celebrated this cake in a 1955 column read by millions of Black Americans. She called it gorgeous with its glistening top. As cast iron cooking declined and box mixes took over, the from-scratch skillet version became rare. But if you grew up watching your grandmother hold her breath during that flip, You never forgot. You carry that moment with you. Number 17, fried chicken livers. When a chicken was dressed for Sunday, the livers were never thrown out because they made a supper all their own. These little dark morsels came nearly free, the part most folks today never think to cook. The cook would rinse them, roll them in seasoned flour, and slide them into hot grease where they spit and crackled and crisped up fast. The outside turned crunchy and brown, while the inside stayed soft and rich. A few minutes was all they needed, and a small bowl of them went a long way. Some families served them over rice with a spoon of pan gravy. Others piled them onto a plate with hot sauce and ate them with their fingers straight from the skillet. Cheap, quick, and deeply savory, fried chicken livers turned a handful of giblets into a real meal, a reminder that nothing on the bird ever went to waste. Number 24, hoe cakes with sorghum molasses, a black iron griddle on a kerosene stove in 1944 Tuskegee, smoking hot, bacon grease pooled in the center. The batter was cornmeal, salt, hot water, nothing else. She dropped it by spoonful, 3 at a time, waited for the edges to lace, flipped each round. Each cake came off the size of a saucer, crisp brown skirt, soft yellow heart. The sorghum sat in a tin pitcher on the table, slow and dark as tar. A child got 2 and was full. A working man got 6 and was satisfied. Your grandmother made these the way her mother had during the Depression. A sack of cornmeal lasted you a family 2 weeks. The supper cost 8 cents in 1944. By 1965, the kerosene stove was gone. The hoe cake went with it. You won't find it on any menu now. Number 25, corn pudding. Plain cornbread spent all year feeding the family. But on Easter Sunday, that same cornmeal got dressed up. 6 ears of fresh corn scraped into a bowl with eggs, whole milk, and real butter, baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into a custard so soft you needed a spoon to serve it. This was the dish that said humble ingredients could be sacred if you treated them right. Enslaved people had survived on cornmeal rations all year long, 1 peck per week. That was the standard. So when Easter came and a free black woman turned that same grain into something worthy of the risen Lord's Day, she was rewriting what cornmeal meant. By the 1970s, corn pudding was a standard Easter side across the South. Today, over 80% of corn pudding recipes use canned corn and Jiffy mix. The custard version, the one that required patience and fresh eggs and a kitchen that smelled like spring, has nearly vanished. Your grandmother did not need a recipe. She needed a cast iron dish and 45 minutes. Number 25, neckbones and rice. This was the dish that proved the family could eat well on the scraps the butcher almost threw away. Pork neck bones were the bones left after the good cuts were sold off, sold cheap because there was barely a bite of meat clinging to them. But black Southern cooks knew the secret was the long simmer. They covered those bones in water, dropped in an onion and a little garlic, and let the pot go for 2 or 3 hours until the meat fell off and the broth turned dark and rich. Then they cooked the rice right in that stock, so every grain soaked up the flavor of the bone. What looked like nothing on the cutting board became a steaming bowl that filled a grown man up after a day in the field. The trick was patience, not money, tender meat, savory rice, and a broth worth keeping. A whole supper out of what others called waste. Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week. Number 17, fried bologna and biscuit sandwich. A round of red rind bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh, 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the bologna lost its red rind. Number 23, hog jowl and black-eyed peas. Most people think of this as a New Year's dish. It was, but during the Depression and Jim Crow, it showed up on Easter tables too, in homes where a whole ham was a dream your family could not afford. Hog jowl was the cheek of the pig, 15 cents at the butcher. Black-eyed peas were 10 cents a pound. Together, they fed your whole family for a quarter. That was the entire cost of your Easter dinner, about $5.50 in today's money. Black-eyed peas were not even American. They came from West Africa, where cowpeas had been cultivated for centuries before the slave trade brought them across the ocean. Food historian Michael Twitty traced that journey in his book, The Cooking Gene, following the cowpea from the fields of Senegambia to the tables of Georgia. On your Easter Sunday, those peas symbolized coins, prosperity, hope. For a family shut out of every door America had, a pot of peas was not failure. It was a declaration. We will eat well and together no matter what. Number 24, fried bologna. Long before it became a punchline, this was an honest meal that kept many families going. During the Depression, bologna was often the only meat a household could afford, and it was frequently the only meat on hand. Cooks would slice it thick, cut little slits around the edge so it would not dome up in the pan, and fry it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and browned. That crisp ring around the outside was the whole reward. Pressed between 2 slices of light bread with a smear of mustard, it became a sandwich that a child could carry to school or a worker could fold into a lunch pail. Sometimes it went over rice with a little gravy made from the drippings. Cheap, fast, and filling, it stretched a few cents into a real plate of food, a humble meal that asked for nothing and gave back plenty. Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 20, hog head cheese. In Louisiana, the butcher made a special Easter batch. Hog head cheese was not cheese at all. It was a cold-cut terrin made from boiled pig parts. Head, feet, ears, tongue. All of it simmered until the natural gelatin from the bones set the meat into a mold. Vinegar kept it preserved. You sliced it thin and spread it on saltines, or stuffed it into a po' boy, or cubed it and ate it like actual cheese. The Poche family of Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, has been making hog head cheese commercially since 1962. They are one of the last traditional operations in the state. The number of Louisiana butcher shops making house-made hog head cheese for Easter has declined by an estimated 70% since the 1980s. This was the ultimate expression of making something from nothing. The parts of the animal nobody else wanted turned into something so good that butchers sold it in special Easter molds because even scraps deserve to be celebrated. Today, it sells for $8 to $10 a pound. If you are under 40, you have probably never tasted it. Those are the dinners. 25 ways to take the cheapest bone at the butcher counter and turn it into something that held the family together when everything else was pulling apart. Some of these meals are still being cooked in kitchens across the South and in the Great Migration cities where the tradition traveled. Others have gone quiet along with the women who carried them. If your family made neckbone dinners, drop the one that owned your kitchen table. That is the one worth keeping alive, because the cooks who figured out how to feed a family on next to nothing are the same ones who figured out how to hold a family together on everything else.